Do you ever worry that your qualitative research findings section just isn't doing justice to your participants' stories, or that your analysis ends up being too thin, too cluttered, or too scattered for your readers to make sense of? Hey, co-authors. In this episode, we're talking about how to write a rigorous and evocative qualitative research results section, one that captures people's lived experiences with rigor, empathy, and clarity. We'll discuss how to turn raw data into a compelling, credible, and human-centered narrative. So let's dive in. When I did my very first qualitative research project, I was an undergraduate student, and I was really interested in this idea of teacher burnout because before I had decided that I wanted to be a professor, I'd actually wanted to be a high school teacher. I wanted to do research that I thought would help other people in the same profession as they were navigating all the things that they had to deal with as teachers. You know, the parents, the students, the administration, the state and federal policies, all the different things that we know lead to teacher burnout. So I wanted to do these interviews. And up until that point, I'd had no experience interviewing people before. And so I remember creating my interview questioning route and having the 8 or 10 questions that I had that I was going to ask teachers who were currently teaching. And I remember just going through and I'd ask a question and then they'd answer it. And then I'd ask another question and then they'd answer it. And I didn't have any follow-up questions, no probing questions. It wasn't really a conversation. It was just me sitting down with this person, asking them 8 or 10 questions, and then being done in like 20, 25 minutes. And I remember coming back right after I'd done about 10 or 15 of these interviews, and after I'd transcribed all the data, looking through and trying to figure out what the themes were, and realizing I didn't really have any themes because I hadn't really asked any really good questions. And so whenever it came time for me to write my results section, it was almost impossible because I did not have very good data because I had not done a good job asking the right questions. Now, whenever I'm editing and reviewing other people's work, especially whenever that work is qualitative in nature, so interviews, focus groups, ethnographies, things like that, it's really important for me to be able to see all the ways that that author is doing two things. First, unlike me, whenever I was an undergrad, they had what Lindelof and Taylor called a conversation with a purpose. In other words, did they really build rapport with their participants? Did they really treat them in humanizing and humane ways? And can I see that in the way that the data has been gathered and presented to me as a reader? And then the second thing is can I see that there is a depthness to the type of data that is being presented to me in a way that creates this very credible, nuanced, full portrait of how people are living their lives, making sense of their social realities, and working through all of the various habits and rituals that are a part of their society and of their culture. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how to make sure that you are crafting an evocative, qualitative research results section whenever you're trying to publish your academic research. So let's dive in. Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea. The first thing that I will say before we kind of get into the common pitfalls that I oftentimes see writers get into whenever they're trying to write their qualitative results section is that qualitative research just has a different type of approach to it than quantitative research does. And as a result, it can confuse people about how to report their findings. Most of the research that we imbibe on a daily basis, whether that's actual published research in an academic journal or your average survey of is he hot or not, or does she love you in Cosmo magazine, most of that research is quantitative in nature, right? So we are inundated with a quantitative approach to research. And as a result, whenever we come to qualitative research, we might not have that sort of depth of knowledge, that background knowledge that really helps us make sense of these things from the get-go. And in particular, what I find is that there's this sort of balancing act that you have to have between reporting your findings and showcasing those in a way that convinces your reader that people experience their social realities in this way, what Clifford Geertz would call a thick description of people's social realities, while at the same time not bogging down your reader with just so many quotes, anecdotes, and stories that it becomes just a laborious slog to get through. So in navigating this tension, what we're really trying to get at is this idea of honoring our participants' voices and the things that they're going through and the things that they're saying, while at the same time recognizing that this is a research report. We have 20, 25, 30 pages in which to execute this document, maybe more if you're doing a thesis or dissertation or a book, but even still, like, you can't just put an endless series of quotes there for your readers. You are in this balancing act between conciseness and truly capturing all the things that your participants are going through, all of the things that don't fit into a neat little Likert scale. As we're talking about the common problems that a lot of people face when writing this type of research, as well as the solutions, I just think it's really important to recognize that one of the things that is animating so much of the issue here is this tension. So, what are some common problems that I typically see whenever I'm reviewing or editing work that's qualitative in nature? As I kind of mentioned before, one of the things that I see probably the most that people do is they just copy and paste a whole bunch of quotes together and call that a theme. They're not really doing a good job of figuring out what in the data is actually connected to whatever they think of as the theme that's going across all of their data points. They're not doing a very good job of showing how the different pieces of data might fit together to be something that's read as more than just the sum of its parts. Instead, you just dump a whole bunch of quotes and you just sort of try to brute force your reader into agreeing with you by just throwing everything that you can in terms of data. I find this particularly true whenever someone says that they're doing narrative research, as if somehow just by saying, oh, well, I'm doing narrative research, so I wanted to make sure that I was honoring participant stories, that somehow gives you a license to give me a half page or full page single space block quote that you just foist on me as the reader and make me make all of those connections for you. That's not what we're supposed to be doing here. One of the most powerful ways that we can think about qualitative research is that we are representing people's social realities to them in such a way that whenever a reader sees it, and especially if that reader was a participant, they should be able to read that work that you've produced and go, I understand what you've written about me is truthful, and I recognize the things that you have said about me and my social practices as being accurately represented here. And I never really thought to myself that what you told me about my culture, my practices, whatever they might be, is idiosyncratic, it's particular, it's nuanced, and I'd never thought about it like that. Now that you say that, I can see the truth in how you're representing my social reality back to me. But you don't really get that if you're just pasting quotes. If you're just throwing data at your reader, they're never going to have that moment. The second problem that I see, and you might have heard this advice if you've ever done any type of creative writing, and that's the idea that you should show and not tell. In qualitative research, I oftentimes see people who do way too much telling and not enough showing. So what do I mean by that? Well, first, I should have a pretty good representative sample of quotes that are being interwoven through your analysis and your description in this section. If I don't see a lot of quotes, what I end up getting is a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs of you telling me what's in the theme or what the theme means or whatever it might be. And then I get one little snippet of data, right? Like maybe a sentence or maybe even less than a sentence. And then you go on and with another paragraph, and then you give me another little snippet of what a participant said. You're really talking over your participants at this point. You're telling me as the reader about what's going on in the theme. And in fact, you're carrying the analysis. This has become less about what participants are saying and their stories, their narratives, their ideas, whatever it might be, how those things are helping us generate this thematic analysis, which in turn answers your research question. And instead, it has become the you show where you are telling me all of the answers to the research question that you posed. Well, that's not research, right? That's really just you leading the analysis rather than you providing and generating an analysis from participants' data. Whenever you're looking at your results section, if you're finding yourself not putting enough data in there, And by enough data, I mean probably anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 different excerpts from your participants per paragraph as you're showing all of the nuances and dimensions of each theme. And those themes are probably themselves 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs in length. So you should be showing a lot of data throughout this section to really help generate this portrait for me. If instead of doing that, I see a whole bunch of writing, but not a lot of quotes, then I can be reasonably sure that you're telling me what's going on and not showing me. And as a result, I have less reason to trust you. And not just trust you in the sense of I don't trust that the analysis has been conducted, because obviously that hasn't been done because you're answering your own research questions, but trust that you actually listened to participants and that you sought to really honor their voices through this analysis, because you've taken over the stage where they should be speaking to me as the reader, and instead you're taking up all the oxygen in the room. The final thing that I see as a pretty common problem in qualitative research sections is that it doesn't really matter how you say that you analyze the data or what you said that you did. Inevitably, what it came down to is that you just use frequency as your main approach to the data. And what I mean by that is that you might have a type of coding, let's say emotion coding, where you were trying to code the data and look through the interviews for all of the ways that emotions were expressed or talked about through the data. So let's say, for example, that you had a research topic that was how do cancer patients self-disclose their terminal diagnosis with their families? And to do that, we wanted to use emotion coding. So we're looking at the types of emotions that they say that they experienced as they were doing this self-disclosure work with their families. So that was your research question. That's your coding scheme. I look at your results section, and your results has a theme in there that's like frustrations with medical billing. And all of the data in there is about how these cancer patients are interacting with medical professionals to make sure that their insurance is correct, and all the frustrations that they've had of trying to make sure that they are paying the hospital like they're supposed to. Well, that's a part of the emotion coding, right? That's got frustrations in it. So at first blush, this should be a part of our results section, but it's not really answering the research question, which was about self-disclosure of the terminal illness to their families. And so even though I'm sure all of these participants have had some type of problem with billing and insurance because, well, especially if you live in America, insurance here is a nightmare. And so everyone, whether you've got the sniffles or you're faced with a terminal diagnosis, you have to deal with the insurance companies. Despite that being something that was frequently said by your participants and was a part of the emotions that they expressed, it wasn't really about your research question. So a lot of novice researchers focus on frequency, even whenever they say I'm focused on, in this case, emotion coding, because so many people said this, that ends up being a part of the analysis and part of the results, even though it has nothing to do with the research project or with answering the overall research question. And that becomes really apparent whenever you're reading the results section, because you can kind of see how their analysis keeps veering off in these different directions because they're not following their actual coding scheme or analytical framework that they were supposed to at the beginning. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the problems that are pretty common whenever someone's writing a qualitative research section. So what then are some ways that we can address those things? Well, I've got some ways that you can work towards writing a better qualitative results section. First off, and probably most importantly, is just making sure that you have good organizational flow for your themes and your subthemes as you're writing up all of your results. Oftentimes I see one of two sort of errors that I think novice writers make in this area. The first is that they have their overarching themes, so their broad thematic categories that they have going on. And then they have all of these data points, which are actually quite rich in all of the nuances that they have. But those things aren't really popping because as a writer, you're just kind of putting it all under the bag of this theme. On the other hand, I see the exact opposite problem. I see people who have a broad thematic category and then they just have an inexcusable amount of subthemes. And so every little thing requires a subtheme, and usually each subtheme only contains like one, maybe two pieces of data in it. Well, that's not a theme, even a subtheme, unless what you're going for is that you're really leaning into the specificity of a topic, especially if that topic is one where you're dealing with very vulnerable populations or populations that are very hard to reach. In those instances, it might be fine to have less data points. But for the most part, if you don't have a lot of data points, that means that either you didn't do a good job analyzing the data and creating a theme, or you didn't actually reach theoretical saturation. You didn't generate enough data to properly fill out all of your themes. So whenever you're organizing your themes, then what you want to do is first think to yourself, okay, do I have enough data? And typically what I do is if I have broad categories, but I have thematic concepts that are emerging within those themes, then I'll italicize that word that is a part of that broader theme, just to sort of visually denote to my reader that this is an important concept. If, on the other hand, you have enough data that you can create those subthemes, then you should do that, but you want to make sure that you have enough data to fill out each one of those subthemes. If you have 20, 30, 50 people that you've interviewed, done focus groups with, worked with in your ethnography or whatever it might be, and you have 2 or 3 subthemes and they all have 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 different data points. And then you have this one itty bitty little subtheme over here that's only got 1 or 2 pieces of data. That just naturally invites scrutiny from your reader, because why are you not filling out this data point? Is it because that subtheme should have been collapsed into another subtheme? Is it because you didn't do a good job of asking questions that got you enough data? Is it because this wasn't something that actually emerged as something that was important to your participants? It invites more questions than it gives answers. And in your results section, it's all about you giving answers to your research question. So you don't want to write in a way that invites your reader to think that you might be holding back or not being entirely truthful with them. The second thing that's really important for you to do is develop a good sense of whenever you as the author should be stepping in and writing and talking in your voice within the results section, and when to let participant voices speak. Typically, what I try to do is I will say what my thematic concept is, whatever is the overarching category or subtheme that I'm doing. I will then point the reader to the specific nuance that my data is going to support in the rest of the paragraph that I'm going to be talking about in that particular section. I show the data points from the participants and weave those through, showing 2, 3, 4, 5 different pieces of data. And those things become sort of the evidentiary anchor for the claim that I made at the beginning of the section and the beginning of the paragraph, which is here's what these participants are saying and here's what I think it means. And then you read the data and I'm basically saying to you as the reader, don't you understand these participants in the same way that I did? Don't you see the same things that I see in this data and how it connects to this thematic category? And so it's really important then whenever you're doing stuff like that, whenever you have pieces of data, in a row, that you are not inundating your reader with a whole bunch of long quotes that have a lot of extraneous information in them. It's also important that you're using good signposting words. So saying things like, this participant said this. In addition, another participant said, in contradiction to this, a third participant said. So those sorts of signposting words can really do a lot of rhetorical work of helping your reader work through your data and it not just being a series of endless quotes, but instead you're inviting your reader to see the similarities in these things. Additionally, moreover, in agreement, right? And in those times where there's difference, you can say in comparison, alternatively, in contradistinction. Those types of signposting words can really help your reader know what you're trying to say. And then whenever you finish your paragraph, you want to reassert what was the underlying theme that was going through all of these different participants. So that way your paragraph is saying, hey, this is what I saw. I think you're going to see this too. Then you show the evidence, you show the data, capping it off with, and remember, this is the thing that I said that was going on, and you saw the same thing that I did, right? And on to the next paragraph or the next subtheme. And that way, as your reader is working through your writing, you're relieving them of the cognitive burden of having to go, okay, is this a piece of data that agrees with this or disagrees with it? Is this something that's a part of the theme or not? You're doing that work for them in the prose, but also getting out of the way of the participants enough so that way their voice is still the star of the show. The third thing that you want to do is make sure that you are showcasing that you have reached saturation, that is, that you have gathered enough data, that you've heard those things repeated by your participants enough that you know that there's not really new ideas or unexplained or unexpected nuances within that data. You've heard it all. And you do that, you show that level of saturation through your thick description, through your ability to weave these different pieces of data together in a way that invites your reader to see them as a coherent whole that's supporting the thematic category. Because that thematic category, that is an abstraction. That is an academic's way of understanding what these participants are saying. Whenever you have this thematic category, a participant might not look at that thematic category and go, oh yeah, that's what I meant. That's how I thought about things, right? Because that's not the way that lay people naturalistically talk. That's how we talk as academics. So it's really important then that you are showcasing all of the different points of data that secure for me as a reader that you have saturation through your thick description. A huge part of that is just having enough data to fill out each one of your themes. I recently reviewed a paper and the authors had over 70 participants, and yet they would have a results section where themes had 1 or 2 pieces of data in it. So you're asking me to believe that a group of 70 people can be neatly encapsulated into 1 or 2 pieces of data. That is straining my believability as a reader that all of the nuance, all of the differences within the similarities of your themes, all the little things that make your data naturalistic and not just Likert scales with words, all of that has to be shown to me in the prose. And so whenever you show me 2 pieces of data for what should be over 70 people, I have problems with that. I think to myself, well, did the other 70, 75 people, did they actually agree with this theme? Did they actually speak in a similar way? I don't know, because you're hiding too much from me. And so making sure that you are convincing your reader that you reach saturation, and the way that you do this is by having good, thick description of your thematic categories by showing important and representative pieces of data from your participants. And overall, I would say that's the most important thing about this, because as qualitative researchers, we are not finding our findings. They are not uncovered. They don't emerge. None of those verbs really work for us because we don't think that meaning is in the text. It's not in something to be uncovered, and it doesn't spring forth like Athena from Zeus's head, perfect and immaculate. Instead, we, as the writers, are interpreting subjects. We are interpreting people's experiences, the things that they go through in their lives, and then we're translating that into the academic language that we have to analyze those things and inviting then our readers to see the same things that we're doing. So we are asking our readers to see a preferred meaning in the text, which is to say we want to guide them to see the same things that we see. You could see other things in the data. That's the beauty of qualitative research. If I looked at your data for your project, I might come up with a different coding scheme, have different themes, have different sort of ideas of what's going on in that data than you do. And the reason for that is because it's not about uncovering or finding meaning. It is about making an argument to our readers that there is a preferred meaning that we want them to come away with. And here is the evidence, that is the data that we have, the quotes from our participants that help justify and warrant what we think of as our thematic categories. So some practical tips that you can do whenever you're writing your qualitative results section. First, make sure that your data collection techniques match your coding method, and that should match your research question. One of the big pitfalls is that people, they don't really follow their coding scheme. A lot of people, whenever they're asking questions, whenever they're doing their interviews, focus groups, or whatever they might be doing, those questions that they're asking aren't really addressing the research question that they have. Again, taking that idea of emotion coding. If your research question is about the emotions that people have in this self-disclosure, then your interview questions, your focus group questions, your ethnographic questions really need to focus on those emotions. And you need to be sensitive in your data collection, not just for the times whenever they say, I was angry or I was sad, but their body language, the paralinguistics that they have, the voice inflection, all those things that can be a part of your text. And so your questions, your data collection techniques need to be laser focused on the way that you're going to code it. And then that coding, if you're using, in this case, emotion coding, that needs to match your research question. So your research question should say something like, what were the emotions in this self-disclosure? Or if you're using like taxonomic coding, you can say, what are the ways that cancer patients with terminal diagnoses use self-disclosure as a way to regulate their emotions? Okay, well, here you have a taxonomic analysis. People who are using one thing, self-disclosure, to obtain another thing, emotional regulation. What are the ways that they're doing that? Well, that's a taxonomy. Those are those different strategies. That question can shift slightly as it reflects your coding scheme, which should manifest in the questions that you ask in your data gathering. The second thing I will say is that it's really important to do member checks. I know a lot of qualitative researchers don't do that. I think that it's important just for the veracity of the research that you're conducting. I also just think that it's a good ethical imperative to have. As qualitative researchers, we should not be thinking of our participants as mere data points. They're not just filling out some survey. They're not anonymous. They are living, breathing people who are sitting across from us, talking to us. We're engaging in reciprocal self-disclosure with them. They're talking about their lives. We are, in turn, talking about ours. We're bonding with each other over this shared purpose in this conversation. To build that type of relationship with someone just in order to extract information from them and not even give them the courtesy to check and make sure that the things that you are going to write about them and their experiences, that it actually connects with the way that they experience and see the world around you. I don't find that to be an ethically compelling way of moving through the world. So I think that member checks, again, are a really great way of making sure that you are staying honest and truthful and connected to the people that we serve through our research. And it's also just a good way of making sure that we are creating research that is compelling and thoughtful and rigorous. The final thing that I will say is, as you're approaching your qualitative results section, I really want you to try to inhabit this space as being a caretaker of other people's stories and other people's lives. That's really what we're doing here, right? We're taking other people's experiences. We are gathering those, analyzing those, treating those as data to come up with new and novel insights into our shared social realities and the things that we believe and know and love and hate and all the different things that we are a part of as human beings on this planet. You can do all sorts of things to try to even the power out between you and your participants. You can do member checks. You can give them veto power over the things that you write about them. You can allow them to be a co-writer even in the project, right? There's a lot of cool stuff that's out there in qualitative research that really does try to address this power imbalance between us as writers and them as participants. But for the most part, you are the one who writes, and they are the ones who are written about. And that comes with a deep ethical responsibility for you to get it right, and not just get it right in the sense of getting it correct, although obviously that's important, but getting it right in the moral sense of making sure that you are treating your participants with the diligence and respect that they are due, and being a credible and sensitive caretaker of the things that they have shared with you. So that's going to just about wrap it up for me, folks. As always, I'm interested in the things that you all do whenever you're writing your qualitative results section. What are habits, rituals, tips, tricks, things that you do to make sure that you're able to write a results section that really does do justice to your participants while still being an engaging read for your readers and for your audience? I always like learning about new things that I can share with my students or with my clients. I teach qualitative research seminar every year at my university. It's one of the great joys that I have because it's the first real experience that they have with doing human participant research. And a lot of them go on to submit their work at conferences or even for publication. And to really see that switch in students from being a receiver of knowledge to being an active participant in generating knowledge for others about questions and ideas that might be the first time that anyone's ever studied this problem before, it's so much fun to see students go through that process. I hope that you're going through that process as well. I hope that you're having fun doing this. And I hope that even if you have been doing this for many years, that you don't really lose that spark that you have to do research that really does address really important problems and does so by doing this very careful, considered, ethical caretaking of other people's stories. I will also say that I'm always happy to take on new clients as a writing coach. So if you're interested, I'm happy to do everything from reading your manuscript and providing in-depth feedback on it, having regular check-ins with you on the projects that you're doing, or just spending an hour or so every week or every month or however much you need, just talking and venting about the things that are going on in your department, in your university, and in your world. I always want to make sure that you're getting your research done and that you're being successful in the things that you're doing. If there's any way that I can help in being a part of that process, then please reach out to me. My contact information is in the description. The first 30 minutes of any of my consultations are always for free. I always want to make sure that you are writing the things that bring you joy and that it's going to get into the hands of people who are going to read it, cite it, and appreciate it. Okay? So thanks again, and I'll see you in next week's episode. Hey, co-authors, what's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.